The Age of Uncertainty podcast by Nigel Baker.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Age of Uncertainty podcast, a very, very, very irregular podcast on the changing world of work. Now, this episode, actually, I'll be honest with you, it's a bit of a, what should we call it? A recycling. This was originally done about 18 months ago, for maybe 2 years ago, for an Agile Scrum Gathering. Paul and I did a presentation on pairing, and we were asked to repeat that presentation for the Agile Network, a now sadly gone Agile streaming network. And I thought, why let it die with the network? Let's give it a bit of life here as the latest episode. Now, this was originally a conference presentation, so it is chunky. It is not snackable content, though it should be fun. It's about an hour, so you may want to watch it in slices. I think it's fun. And of course, it was recorded on Zoom, so the production quality is a little lower, especially with Paul and I reduced to sort of 7 pixels each in the corner of the screen. But having said that, seeing my face all the way through and his is probably not what you really want anyway. So just concentrate on the slides, maybe listen to it as a podcast just in the audio mode, and I think you'll get some value from it. If you stay around to the end, I've got a little advert for some of the new products and services we're offering in Agile Bear, which I'd love you to buy, consume, or at least suggest to your colleagues. Anyway, enough talking by me. Let's now get to the talking by me. See you soon. Good morning.
Hello
Welcome
to
Jurassic
Park.
Oh, we could do this all day, couldn't we? Lovely. Welcome to pairing.
Right.
The most electrifying tag team skill in the world of Agile development.
This is Nigel Baker, and Nigel is a Agile coach and a trainer, and he's been doing that for well over 20 years by now. And as you can see behind Nigel is a keen collector of books, but also what you can't see so much of is a keen collector of 80s retro toy memorabilia.
G.I. Joe, Transformers, Star Wars, the lot.
It's in this room somewhere, pretty much.
Everywhere. And I'd like to introduce you to Paul Goddard, who is also an Agile coach and Scrum trainer for the last, funny enough, 20 odd years. Paul's interesting fact is that he looks a bit like John Travolta in his own mind.
Make your own mind up, people. Make your own mind up.
I think you need the John Travolta haircut he wears today.
What? Just shave it all off?
Exactly, go for it. So we've asked you to come here today, or you've all volunteered to turn up to see this event, talking about pairing, the skill and the magic of pairing, and how it can be applied in a variety of settings.
So, Nigel and I, we've known each other for a long time as well as worked together. And it's fair to say we've done a lot of pairing together on pretty much, we're going to tell you some stories here about where we've paired before. We're going to give you some tips and some traps to look out for as if you're pairing, regardless of the context, whether you're developing or like us, we still pair as trainers these days.
And what you'll find is actually there's many things we can learn from a variety of other industries where they have really perfected the art of pairing, where we are really still novices in our space. No spoilers, but if you look at the screen,
mainly wrestling,
a lot of wrestling references, but you'll see why that's so important as we go along. So let's go to the history of pair programming. Now, here is a slide of doom. I've literally cut and paste here from the work by Making Software by Andy Oram and Greg Wilson, describing some of the history of pair programming. Now, you probably are aware of pair programming, but it's been around a long, long time, longer than even that term. Fred Brooks, who wrote the famous Mythical Man Month book, he spotted it and did it in the 50s. Larry Constantine talked about dynamic duos in the 80s. And Jim Copleen, with the famous pattern work he did, published the Developing in Pattern work back in, I believe, the 90s. So these ideas have been around a long, long time before they were adopted by extreme programming.
Yeah, and extreme programming, the concept is that literally you'd have one computer, one keyboard, and 2 people working together. And the idea was that working and building code, writing code together, one would be looking, reviewing what one person's typing and writing, and then literally shifting the keyboard from one side of the desk to the other, and then switching over to reverse the roles in pretty quick succession.
Yeah, and people thought this being very counterintuitive back in the day. They thought 2 developers on one thing, what a waste of money. And it turns out through as many research projects and experiences people have had, that turns out not to be true. People produce a lot more code, a lot higher quality, with a lot more savings. There's so fewer defects in the experience. So some people, they like to talk about it being like a driver and a navigator, where one person does the tactical thinking. Paul, I'll drive
Yeah.
on the keyboard, and the other person is reviewing, acting as navigator, looking a bit ahead. Now, this quote is actually off Wikipedia, and there is a line missing from it, which is the final line says, the 2 programmers switch roles frequently. So the idea is you're not just always a navigator, always a driver, you're switching it back to me,
To you.
to me.
To you.
There we go. So passing it backwards and forwards like this, working together. Now, I've got Paul and I are going to try and alternate slides as much as we can here, pairing, time boxing, and handing it back and forth. But sometimes that doesn't quite work because for instance, I've got to talk about my favorite subject. Well, not software development, me. So I think you'd all appreciate the photo here of me. Look how handsome I was. I was so
Very
beautiful.
handsome.
I was so beautiful, wasn't I, Paul? I was so beautiful.
Taken just yesterday, I think, wasn't it?
It was just after a cup of coffee in the morning. I like to call it BA before Agile. So when I first started, not first started programming, but first started pair programming. So I was on one of the early Scrum teams in Europe, and we had a variety of techniques we were trying. It wasn't just Scrum on its own. We were trying a lot of XP techniques at the same time. And pairing was the one we really struggled with, or I personally struggled with, because I was quite new as a developer in that language. I'd been a developer for nearly 5-6 years, but I hadn't developed much in Java, which was the language we were using. And so when we started talking about pairing together on work, as a novice, I kind of looked at it a little bit like mentoring. So I thought, I'm going to pair with John. He's going to show me what to do,
Yeah.
and I'm going to pick it up. And when we started doing it, it wasn't like that. John was like, so what do you think? And I was like, I don't know what to think. And so that's really important to understand. Well, later on in this presentation, we are, in fact, a few slides time, we are going to talk a little bit about sort of pairing as mentoring a little bit, but good pair programming isn't like that. It shouldn't really be a student-teacher dynamic. You're supposed to be working together collectively as equals. Now, here's the other thing. So on our team, it wasn't just John, there was other colleagues. One other colleague I know didn't particularly like pairing either. I'm never quite sure why. I feel that perhaps because we were all quite new in the space, we all felt a little vulnerable. So we all had a lot of shields up at the time. So we tried it a bit, but it was by far the hardest practice I could imagine.
It puts a spotlight on what you're doing, and as a developer, sometimes that can be quite a scary thing. I completely agree.
Especially, I think, back for us when we were all, our entire department was quite homegrown. So everyone had kind of learnt skills despite the craftsmanship, not because of craftsmanship. So we had all sort of picked up our own little foibles of how we worked. And so really little habits. You don't realize they're bad till you're sat next to someone pairing with them. And so it is awkward at first. But I did get a lot out of it. We just didn't do it as much as I would have liked.
Good stuff. Yeah, and similarly, not just developing, but Nigel and I kind of started Scrum Mastering together at a similar time in British Telecom, and it was like it's a scary thing. We didn't really know what we were doing. We were looking for inspiration and also looking to verify our own understanding and experience. So we used to spend a lot of time pairing as Scrum Masters, different teams, but also just as a sounding board to check, double check, am I doing this right? And what's your thoughts on this new retrospective technique or design that I've come up with? So just the act of growing as a Scrum Master is important. We've grown as Scrum Masters, as pairs through that process. But I think also within a Scrum team, you've got to look at pairing as a valuable skill as well. So pairing with the product owner, for example. So you are a partnership. You can learn from each other. You should be supporting each other. Ken Schwaber used to talk about the idea of the product owner and the Scrum Master being the yin and yang of the framework. The idea of actually working together, even though their roles are slightly opposing in many respects. But it is a partnership. It is something that you can actually support each other through that process. And also, as a Scrum Master, you should be available to pair maybe with developers and testers, sharing your experience and being that agile conscience on what we should do next. Maybe not being prescriptive about how to do it, but certainly a reminder of the process that we're following or the principles that we're trying to adopt.
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful agile practices, what Paul said, is having another buddy, having a Scrum Master pair
Yeah.
you can work with. And just sometimes you just need someone to hear you. You don't need an answer. You just need to share your grievances, and they nod, and you go, "I could feel the pain." But switching facilitators between meetings is interesting as well.
Yeah.
You can always swap. I'll facilitate your retro, you do mine, to get a bit of different change, a bit of flavor, a bit of objectiveness.
Something I recommended literally just last week, and it was like a light bulb going on. That they had two facilitators in the room. Said, "Why don't you just borrow each other for the next meeting? It just makes sense."
So, and then it can help with psychological safety. And so psychological safety is a bit of a buzzword that gets thrown around our industry a bit, So we've got to be a little bit careful here. I like our joke this is from our joke book, by the way, Pun Mastery, which is available in all good shops. Well, mainly Amazon, I think.
Well, yes, yeah, in shops. It's available in
Shop, singular, not plural, available in shop. But mob programming in 3 words, misery loves company. But that's actually true. Sometimes having someone to share the old foxhole in the war can be really helpful. And also having a pair who you can share information with, share knowledge with, can make you feel more secure in your decision-making processes, more secure in your choices you're making. You're thinking, yeah, I'm not a fool. I'm not an imposter. I'm being validated here by someone, which makes you more likely to defend those robust decisions you may be making. So it's a really useful tool just to help you get through the day-to-day of work.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're going to move on to another 80s reference now, which I feel somewhat of an imposter now trying to explain the next slide.
Oh, shall I do it?
So I'm going to pass the microphone here to my trusted colleague, Mr. Nigel Baker.
So as Paul said, I do love the 80s and 70s and 90s. This is 1999, Paul. The Phantom Menace. Some would say the greatest of the Star Wars films, but those people would not be well. But I really love the Phantom Menace. I went to see it recently. True story. I'll just tell it on camera. But I went to see the 30th anniversary of Phantom Menace. It was really good.
The only one in the cinema?
No, I went with a couple of friends. It really held up. Anyway, pairing as coach. So here's the problem. A lot of people look at pairing. Like I used to offer this as a service where I would go in as a coach, and I'd always hate to sort of just coach teams cold. I think having an outsider come in and do that can feel quite imposing, can feel quite unpleasant. And so what my aim was always to coach the coach or train the trainer, try and build up their capability so they can do it, and they'll stay here forever when I can leave and go do something else. And so that's a really interesting idea, growing internal capabilities. But you could end up, if you're not careful, with a little bit of the old Jedi Master, Jedi Padawan thing, which we're really trying to avoid in a real pair. We're trying to get us to be equals. And so the reason I chose this, and this is my quote, so I apologize leaving it to Paul, but I don't know if you remember Phantom Menace, but he said, Qui-Gon, if you remember, Obi-Wan Kenobi said, there's something wrong with this. There's some danger here, Master, something elsewhere, elusive. And Qui-Gon Jinn says, don't center on your anxieties. Keep your concentration here and now where it belongs. These Federation types are cowards. The negotiations are going to be short. Turns out the negotiations were not short. We end up with 3 films, I think 3 TV shows full of war and carnage. So it goes to show that you've got to be very careful with this Padawan master mentality, because in this situation, the Padawan knew better than the master. And so really to approach pairing in a real equal collaborative approach. You may be more experienced, less experienced, but don't bring that agenda with you. That's a really important idea.
Yeah, I think some of our very early experiences as agile coaches learning our trade in big companies, we needed that that third party that we were being coached by an external party, a number of individuals who were helping us out. And they were really helpful for us in terms of trying to leverage their more neutral standpoint. They could say some of the things that we couldn't say, maybe from a career development point of view, that we didn't feel would be career productive for us. So they would help us out with that. But I think there are some warning signs here that I think we would probably want to share with you, that you've got to be careful if you're anyway stepping more into coaching individuals, that a pair of coaches like me and Nigel then coaching one person can be quite intimidating in that in an individual sense. All of a sudden there's 2 coaches to 1 client, which can sometimes lead to a bit more of an interrogative stance, that you feel all of a sudden you're outnumbered, you're outnumbering your client, which has never really brought fruitful solutions
No,
for me.
it'll bring people's barriers up completely. They feel like they're being almost having an intervention, where
Yeah.
they're bringing their barriers up. So we chose our first wrestling reference, which is the two wrestlers tag teaming onto one.
Yeah.
But the Princess Diana said there are three of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. So when we talk about pair coaching, we don't necessarily mean coaching as a pair,
No.
an individual. What we mean is working together the situation, maybe taking your own turns on particular things. Now, this is where it gets interesting in terms of pairing. So this applies to coaching, but we're starting to talk about pairing as a trainer here, which is getting a good alignment. So mesh, what does mesh mean? It means suit each other or work well together. So what you're looking for in a pair is someone who you can dovetail with nicely, someone you can work with. That doesn't mean there's someone like you. So the examples I've got here. So under mesh, we've got two famous British comedians that a lot of you Americans and in Europe won't have heard of, but oh, so funny. Morecambe and Wise.
Classic.
Oh, so funny. Morecambe is the tall, funny one. Ernie Wise is the short, unfunny one. Now, and you would think this is awful, wouldn't you? Oh, he's unfunny. Why is Ernie Wise? What's he doing? But actually, he made Eric Morecambe look hilarious because he was the stooge, he was the feed, he was the person whose job it was to set the jokes up for Eric Morecambe, and so they worked really well as a pair, even though as individuals they never did as well as they did together. Now compare that to, it could be very easy to get very aligned with someone. Like I was chatting to Paul about this earlier on. We were discussing about how pairing with someone who's very similar to you. And I made the secret revelation to Paul that I'm now going to make on air, embarrassingly, which is a lot of the traits of myself, I don't personally like much in other people. It's awful, really. And I know some people think like, oh, it's not a competition thing. It's not like I think they're competing with me. It's just actually probably there's a bit of self-dislike there. Like some of the traits that I don't like about myself, seeing them in others makes me go, oof. So if I paired with someone similar to me, I think would have a bit of a clash there. A bit of Ryu versus Ryu. And having someone who can complement me as a pair, I think is a really powerful thing to have. And so think about the casting of your pairs and who makes a good pair for you. It may not be the most pleasurable.
Yeah, I think sometimes we especially if many of you are maybe co-training, you don't have to always match styles. Don't feel that your style has to match the person that you're pairing with. You'd be quite surprised sometimes a bit of a different style can actually liven up the audience or just freshen up how you're teaching or how you're training. It doesn't have to always be a carbon copy of what the other person is doing. Might be quite interesting to think about like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember I did a pairing years ago with someone who wanted to become a Scrum trainer. So they were on their sort of pathway to become a Scrum trainer, certified Scrum trainer through the Scrum Alliance. And my concern was about the practicalities, about like he liked to draw a lot. I like to have some stuff pre-visualized. The practicality, but actually we had some difficulties. Well, not a huge amount, but it had some difficulties. But the real difficulties wasn't about the mechanics. It was about the philosophy, about how he actually approached the training compared to me, the sort of style and sometimes that caused not issues for me, but I think sometimes that may have caused issues for the attendees. And I was like, okay, that's a little bit. There's some clashing going on there.
Yeah, and I think this actually works. Segues nicely into this idea that as a trainer, as a pair, try and accept what comes at you. I mean, even if you don't agree with it to a degree, and as Nigel's one of my most favorite quotes that Nigel loves, the idea of come from improv theatre, the concept, the ethos of yes and, the idea of taking an idea, accepting it, and then adding to it, even if you don't agree with it. And this is what great improvisers will talk about, turning blocks into offers. You can take something which stopped you or has got blocked you, and you can reformat it into something positive, into something constructive. And great improvisers and great trainers, great pair trainers are able to do that. And this is a quote, isn't it, from Disagreeing Agreeably, which these are, well, you explain who these people
But these are from the Rest is Politics podcast, which is a political podcast in the UK. Rory Stewart, Conservative cabinet member, Alistair Campbell, famously Labour's sort of Rasputin back in the day. They have a shared podcast. You would think they would bash heads all day, but they don't, because they have this philosophy of disagreeing agreeably. They don't have to agree on stuff, but they don't have to hate each other.
Yeah.
And just referencing back to what Paul said, really important stuff he said about yes and, was that was the difficulty I was having in that prior training, where I was trying to yes and his answers, but he would never do it back.
Right.
So he would
okay.
yes but everything I said.
Oh, really?
Just like,
Okay.
oh, like you could just, if you disagree, that's fine, but disagree in a constructive way to build on it,
Yeah.
which is what I was trying to do.
Okay.
It's like trying to do improv with a very negative person.
Yeah, yeah.
Where you give them offers and they're just
Yeah.
blocking you constantly.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
really painful.
So you can have different philosophical kind of views, but you have to accept and then build on it and present a different future.
And just to build on that, that's generally how Agile should be. It's a huge, wide temple of many different ideas. It's not one philosophy. It's a dozen philosophies under a big umbrella. So I would expect, and in fact, I would encourage there to be differences of opinion. You want that variety. It shouldn't be conformist and similar and everyone agrees to the same thing. I think that would actually possibly be quite dangerous in the long term. Now, Paul, do you remember this?
Oh, this takes me back. This does.
Oh my God, this. So back in the day, 2007, this is the actual date from this slide set, because I found the date on the slide set. 9th of January 2007, we were building lots of slideware for work, and we decided to do basically a Agile Principles pub quiz. So guess the Agile principles through imagery. Now, it turns out in 2007, Google wasn't as full as it is now of good images. So there's lots of really great images. And plus, too much lateral thinking hurts people's brains. So this image was, and I'm sure you've all guessed it at home. Let's just give them a second at home to guess. Shout out at home.
Yeah.
Yes, you're completely right.
Well done. Well done.
It's mutual benefit. And if you don't know the story, by the way, these birds live on the hippos, eat the bugs and the ticks off their back and off their teeth, thus feeding them, and so they get fed by the hippos. So it makes the birds happy, and the hippos are happy because their little bugs and ticks and everything are picked off them. So it's very mutually beneficial for both sides. I think that's what we've been trying to reach to up to this point with this talk about pairing: mutual benefit. You're both equals, you both deserve something out of the experience. And so when you're pairing, you should always be thinking about contributing as much as you can and receiving back as much as you can as well. A very mutually beneficial approach. Now, Paul, we're getting onto our favorite thing here.
Yeah, back to wrestling, everyone. I'm sure that's what everyone's keen to hear about on this this session. So many of you may recognize, many of you may not recognize. So these are two iconic commentators,
completely iconic,
from a kind of this. We're in a kind of like late 90s.
Yeah, I would say
the
so.
Attitude era of WWE as it is now. This is, of course, on the left-hand side here we have Jerry the King Lawler, and we have another legend, Jim Ross, on the right.
Good old JR.
Good old JR. And very much Nigel and I grew up kind of watching this stuff, but they would commentate on wrestling matches, pretty much everything from the commentary position, but they had an interesting dynamic, and it just kind of worked. So you had Jim Ross, he was the knowledge. He understood wrestling kind of as it was from the book, play by play, move by move,
the facts, the situation, the facts,
the technicalities, the detail. And then you have Jerry the King Lawler. There would be the noise. He would be the emotion. He would give the what?
Look at him!
The grunt, the noise.
And this actually exists in all sports. This isn't just a wrestling thing. If you've ever watched football, or as we like to call it, football, or if you ever watched American football, which I believe Americans call football, but you don't kick it with your foot. It doesn't make sense. But or whatever sports, you have two people, one whose job is to give you just the facts, and one who's to add the color, the background, the noise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that kind of that dynamic, that relationship, it gives that range of emotions. It gives the detail, the data and the knowledge perhaps in a slightly more factual way, in a straight way. But then you've got a bit of color, a bit of emotion to also almost relax the brain to take it from a different perspective, to see it slightly differently, as a bit more of the emotion to it.
And this isn't something that wrestling made up, or even sports made up. Edward de Bono was talking about this for decades. He called it the sort of thinking hats model. So if you look at Jerry the King Lawler here, he's got a red crown on. Well, in Edward de Bono's hats, red's emotion, feeling, action, and I think it was white hat, wasn't it? Is facts, just the facts, data. And so you can see about this sort of idea of wearing hats as a coach in a certain situation, playing a certain role can be really, really powerful. And in fact, here, and again, they do this in color commentary sometimes, Jerry the King Lawler was actually what they call a heel. So he would often talk about the negative side of things. So he would talk down the heroes, he would talk up the villains. And that's very much what they call black hat thinking in De Bono, which is about offering a critical voice to enhance or enlighten the situation. And then, of course, you could just wear other ways of wearing hats. Good cop, bad cop. Another classic example, hat wearing. One of you playing the positive, really a very primitive version of sort of black hat, yellow hat thinking. Yellow hat being sort of optimistic and looking to the future, and black hat being all negative. And you could play that as, if you wanted to, as roles.
And particularly, we found when dealing with organizations where there is a lot of resistance, where there is a lot of potential problems, roadblocks in the way, almost empathizing with that difficulty, saying, yeah, this is really tough, this is really difficult, this is going to be challenging, that empathizes with that part of the brain. But equally then to flip it around saying, well, no, but we need to do this, we need to push on this. So it does allow a little bit of different perspective from two different people at the front of the room when they're actually teaching or training together. Is this me or you? I've forgotten now.
This is you.
So this is,
and so will the next one.
yes, good, excellent. So yeah, just going to call out, there are some risks, okay, that when you're, particularly when you're maybe co-teaching or co-training as pairs together. Both Nigel and I have had some difficult experiences that have emerged during that whole training experience, where it becomes clear to yourselves as teachers and to the audience that the dynamic isn't really working. And it's sometimes that's difficult to see up front. It's difficult to navigate when you're there. I had one particular instance where the audience had a difficult relationship with one of the trainers that I wasn't part of. So the audience were kind of almost arguing with the trainer. And then it was therefore difficult for me then to, was I taking a side? Was I trying to offer an alternative? And I became kind of an arbitrator, a mediator of that relationship, which didn't really work very well. So you've got to be, I think, certainly preparation for this in pairing an understanding of the differences and the similarities of your style and your history or experience, but also maybe the connection and the relationship that you have with the people you're teaching, the audience that you have.
I was saying this is where that triad thing comes back in, the three in the marriage joke from Diana earlier on, where there's a third dynamic in training and coaching, which is the trainees or the coaches. And you need to take that into account when there's and we've had it a couple of times, haven't we, where there's been a strange, unfortunate dynamic between our pair and their colleagues or the people the trainers, and we are stuck in the middle of it. And so we're having to act almost as lubricant, as WD-40 to try and sort of loosen up this tension, which again doesn't work well for us because we weren't aware of it. And that actually reminds me, Paul, of this one for you as well, which do you want me to explain who they are, and then you explain the problem?
Then I'll give the
I'll do the color, and then you do the fact.
I'll be Jerry.
Yeah, I'll be Jerry the King. So you obviously, all of you watching know who this is, but for those millions of people who don't, this is a British magician called Paul Daniels, a very successful magician back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Passed away about 10 years ago now, I think. Very famous on British television as a magician, very good, very popular. And this is his assistant on stage, Debbie McGee, who became his wife eventually. And famously, in a famous interview in the 90s, Debbie was asked by the interviewer, Mrs. Merton, "So Debbie, what first attracted you to the millionaire Paul Daniels?" Which is still the most leading skewering line an interviewer could do. But the idea is that Paul is the act, Paul is the value add, Paul Daniels, and Debbie is the a pretty assistant on stage helping him out. And how does this apply to you, Paul?
So I think it's just another story from my my past in terms of, as a trainer, you've got to be careful. And a trap that I fell into was that you're not, as a pair, you are an equal. You're not just an assistant on stage. You're not just the secretary or the scribe. the one that passes out the post-its or the pens. So, and I fell into this trap where the personality types weren't aligned equally, and one person was particularly trying to get more out of that than I was. So I became very subservient to that pair, to that teacher. So I think it's the understanding and the common agreement has to be that we are equals in this, and you're not just there as a glamorous, a very glamorous assistant.
And people use this term in the UK to this day. Oh, I'll play Debbie McGee is what they'll say. But that's okay if it's a conscious choice. If you make it, I'm as an adult, as a professional, I'm going to make the choice to play Debbie in this situation. I'll be the assistant and you take the lead. But it needs to be conscious. And what you don't want in a pair is just to be seen as the lesser of the two evils, sort of thing. Okay. I think it's one more situation for us, Paul, something we've seen all over the world. What was the worst guess given in the history of playing this game? So we must have played this game a dozen times, 24 times. And to be honest, the pub quiz didn't go down well because people just couldn't guess what the things were. It was kind of like watching the worst quizzes on TV, like just the worst, who was prime minister in World War II? Oh, Margaret Thatcher, like this type of levels. And one of the worst answers we got for this was not mutual benefit. It was, oh, it's got something to do with hippos. Hypocrisy. How they got hypocrisy from that joke, I have took it too literally, but I have no idea. But hypocrisy is actually a big danger in our world, a big danger, especially when you're trying to build a coaching pair. And you've deliberately experienced that, haven't you, back in the day?
Yeah. So again, working with a third party coach, someone who was teaching me, but just very much not demonstrating the values that you'd expect an agile coach to be demonstrating. So basically told me off to a degree, and publicly kind of
which is really a bad thing to do. If you're going to criticize, you would never criticize your pair in public, would you?
No.
Like if a good pair, if you've got a really big problem, take it privately. Don't do it in front of other people. You're supposed to be seen as a bit of united front.
And it was, for me as a junior coach at the time, junior trainer at the time, it was in front of my peers in terms of and the audience. It was a largely humiliating experience to be talked down to, or just kind of the feedback and the way it was delivered. It just wasn't fitting with kind of how we wanted to be presented as a pair pair of coaches, and how we were delivering that content and that message to a number of other teams who didn't really understand the principles behind it.
But that wasn't the worst bit, was it?
Okay.
The worst bit. Well, the worst bit was this coach who criticized and told him off. I'll even say what it was. It wasn't a terrible thing. They regarded Paul as being late to an event. Now, Paul was not late to an event. Paul just wasn't as early as they would have liked him to be to the event. Right? But actually, completely legitimately within a time box. I can say that as an independent person, not trying to. But the worst is this person was often late.
Oh yeah.
Afterwards. And so it's not just the negativity of that sort of humiliating behavior and speaking down to someone, but it's the gross hypocrisy of it, not living up to the values and principles that they are proclaiming to you, which I think is the worst bit of all. The worst bit is the hypocrisy. Well, maybe not, but it's pretty bad as well. And I think that's a real danger in pairing, is that what standards are you holding up to? What standards are you expecting from each other? How much leeway are you giving each other? Because you can't hold to a standard something that you cannot hold yourself to. No. That's not pairing, that's punishment.
It's also about respect. I think it's one of the values that we talk about a lot, is that you have to respect each other as a pair. That we have, maybe other other priorities, or other ways of teaching, other points of view, whatever they might be. And that was clearly something that, for me, that was missing in that relationship was mutual respect.
Yeah, because it is important to understand that, again, another wrestling reference coming in here. Rock versus Cena, only one time in history. They fought twice. But apart from that, there's this term called co-opetition, which is, you have to understand, especially if you're independent trainers like we are, okay, in wrestling, right? So hopefully this is no spoiler, but in professional wrestling, if you're sort of 7 years old, you think it's real. Because, but if you're an adult, if you it's not real. It's cooperative, right? So like if you're a bit of a civilian, you think it's real. If you're an adult, it's simulated. But if you're a real professional fan, you'll know that it's a bit of both. because actually the way professional wrestling works is the two wrestlers are pretending to fight, but they're actually paid individually. They're paid as if they rise up the card and perform well. So it's in their interest to look really strong and perform well. But it's also in my interest to make you look strong. Like, I heard a great story about professional wrestling. A young wrestler starts his career. He's gonna have a match with an old wrestler. So he decides to. They have the talk at the start to try and persuade people to watch it. So he says, "Look at this old wrestler here. He's fat, he's bald, he's old, he's got skinny arms, skinny legs. He couldn't beat anything." And he went on TV and said this. And the old wrestler came up to him afterwards and said, "Chris, all those things you said about me. Just remember, when I beat you, and I am beating you, you have been beaten by a old, bald, fat, skinny-armed man." And so Chris realized, oh my God, I've got to talk him up. Like, I've got to actually make sure we both benefit from this mutual benefit, understanding, but we're both in the same space. So we are technically competing companies, are separate companies,
Offer the same
separate
thing.
businesses, offering the same services. We'll often clash on that. Like, they'll come to both our companies at the same time. So co-opetition is not cartelism. It's just understanding that when you work together, both sides need to get benefit from it. Both sides need to contribute, but there is an angle in there of also looking after oneself and not being too selfless, but also understand that working together as a pair can take us to a far better place. So if the two of us have a great match, it means we will both benefit from this. It doesn't actually matter who wins and who loses. And that idea of co-opetition, I think, is a really interesting way to look at pairing. Hey, we're working together, we're collaborating, we've got our own agendas, our own careers, our own lives, our own opinions, but we're using this to try and take that forward.
Excellent. Good stuff. So no spoilers in this one.
Paul's favorite thing. We're now at Paul's favorite part.
I could just hold this slide now for the rest of it. So can we just stop there? Can we stop here?
Leave it here.
So it's just this different training styles. Again, me and Nige put our heads around this in terms of think of different ways that you can operate. And extrovert and introvert. So I would probably class myself, I'll put more of an introvert style, but I'm going to put you in the kind of more extrovert category.
I think that's fair. I think you're Wolverine and I'm Deadpool. I think that's a pretty good example.
I'm happy with that. I'm very happy with that. But that can kind of work. And there's some very, very famous pairs that have worked in our space for a long time that have worked and been very successful based on that dynamic. You don't always have to match, and sometimes those different styles can actually complement each other very well in that kind of environment.
But it's important to understand that you don't have to necessarily be life partners.
No.
We are friends, and that is great, but that's not the essential thing to have in pairing. There is many, many examples in the real world of people who work together well and get on perfectly acceptably, but they are workmates, like workmates, not friends outside of work, and that's completely fine. If you can find people to pair well with, you don't have to have the same interests, you don't have to go out for coffee afterwards. It's not supposed to be a life union. And that's one of the downsides you can get of some successful pairs, is they like the pair. And we talk sometimes about promiscuous pairing, and I think that's not quite the right term for it, but the idea is you want to have multiple pairs with different people to have different experiences and have different interactions.
Yeah, it's very, very true.
But here's a great thing about when you pair as a trainer, especially with coaching, but trainers are special, which is, Paul, ready for this? I'm going to tag you in for the next slide.
Thank you, mate. That's good. So again, I think me and Nigel are quite lucky here that we have worked together for a long time, and we more instinctively know this. And Nigel will know when I'm flagging I'm going to say on stage. That sounds really grandiose, but not what I mean.
Imagine the stage being quite low.
But if you're just struggling for an answer to a question, or if you're struggling to find a connection with content, I could pretty much create a gap, and I know that he would fill it. But that's largely due to the relationship that we formed. But I think great pairs and great partnerships can learn that and can benefit from that. You can give your brain a rest. You can sit down. You can time out. You can take that space to recalculate your thoughts, knowing that someone else has stepped in to take the reins for you.
And especially pre-planned time boxes. I'll do this, you do this. It can really add loads of energy to the room, because a change is as good as a rest. So one of you comes in with a different story, a different angle, the next person steps in. It can really energize the situation. It's not just one voice all the time. So it can that can add energy, add that change. and allows you to step forward and back as you need.
Yeah.
Though, Paul, we need to let them on a secret.
Oh yeah.
We've been using a secret technique, which in the wrestling world is known as giving the Iggy. So let me explain this, because this is an odd thing. But in wrestling, again, hope you know, not real. Right? So sometimes in the ring, they need to communicate with each other without saying anything, because they don't want to give away that, hey, Paul, what I want to do next is you reverse me into the ropes. It's a bit obvious on camera. So what they do is this. Let's say I grab Paul by the arm like this, and I'm going to throw him. I'll just squeeze his wrist twice. That's called giving the office or giving the Iggy. And he knows that means reverse the move. So you throw me into the ropes instead. Well, what's that got to do with us here? Well, we've been communicating with each other. You can't see it, but we've just been squeezing each other's legs. Not for that reason. Don't get excited. But if we want to step in on a topic or on a conversation, or we feel like, okay, this is my bit, I'll talk about this, just giving a little squeeze so the other person knew to step back and let them speak, to allow us to work like this.
Yeah.
And you may need something like that. I think some people use the word safe word, don't they?
Yeah.
Some way to say, look, either get me out of trouble or some way to communicate to allow us to flow the pairing a little bit more.
And it's in some cases, for me, it can be a bit more blatant. I'll literally just politely put my hand up, and maybe the audience can't see that, but Nigel will be able to see I've got something to add here, or I'm ready to go now. Tag me in, and even just adding a bit of color commentary, whatever it might be.
It's trying to find the right space and the right spot. And again, what you may need to do, if again with these wrestlers, some of them have worked these matches 100 times with each other. They don't need to give the Iggy because they've done it 100 times. They could just they know where the move goes. But if you're working with someone new, pairing with someone new, you may want to set up a few of these little rules together. Say, look, if this happens, just to give them a get out of jail free card, give them a little bit of way to reduce the stress.
Excellent. Yeah. So again, another technique that Nigel and I have used many times and still use to this day, really. It gives you another option, especially, and Nigel and I are both trained visual facilitators, so we do a lot of drawing. We try to vary the learning styles and the learning approach by adding flip charts and adding drawings and narrations to our work. And having two pairs on stage gives you that advantage. So we're going to try that now.
Yeah.
Right. So you carry on talking.
But the first thing, before we get there, just listen. So before you get too active, one of you can just be the ears. And when someone's chatting like this, the other one could be paying attention, reading the room and seeing what's going on. Or they could be doing something like this. You know, ready?
So I'm going to do some drawing while he talks.
Okay.
Carry on.
So for an example, so I'm on stage chatting away with you, talking about how you could be reading body language, reading the signs, whilst Paul could be doing something beside me, working on something else. So maybe I'm talking about a particular complex topic. Well, here's the thing. You don't really want to sit there in silence watching me draw for the next 10 minutes. So I can be talking you through the idea whilst Paul stands beside me and actually does the drawing. So I do. You ever heard the term chalk and talk used as a rather negative thing? Well, in this way, we're doing it in parallel, chalking and talking. One is explaining and talking it through, whilst the other one is drawing the material, visualizing it as we go along, giving a richer experience without it being too indulgent, which sometimes visual facilitation can indeed be. Last little bit.
Yeah.
So there we go. Finishing it off.
Almost
there you go. Almost there. Good.
No, I think the one thing I'd say on this that you've got to be careful of is that the audience doesn't become distracted by the person drawing. So I've often found that especially if your drawings are as good as mine, the audience becomes less interested in what Nigel's saying, but more interested in what I'm drawing.
Yeah. So some people will turn the flip chart round, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
So if you're pre-building for the next section, just turn the flip chart round. But if you're doing it in parallel to build a picture up, then you want them visualizing it as you give the narration.
Yeah.
And that takes us into culture.
Go on, it's you.
This is me. So
you're good at.
This is what I'm good at. Well, let's do the one of our great jokes from our joke book. Why don't extreme programmers eat apples? Because they only do pair programming.
Rolling around the floor.
Oh God, I'm dying of death. But having a bit of fun can really help. People love feeling they're in on the joke. They love feeling like there's this relationship going on. If you ever see any successful stage acts, they make you feel part of the experience. They make you feel a part of the engage. That rapport you're building with them and with each other, they find very attractive.
Yeah.
It's important though not to make it too in-jokey. Like it can be very easy to make it about the two of you, and then that's isolating your audience, isolating the attendees. You need to all be in it together. Okay, so you can't have too many little side jokes and side like comments going on. Otherwise, they'll just feel like there's some secret conversation going that they're not a part of.
Yeah, some famous pairs. So
So many, isn't there?
yeah, I
So
mean,
many.
we struggled we tried to pick some of them, but perhaps the more universally famous ones here across the globe. But you've probably, even though you don't realize it, how many times you've seen it on camera. Laurel and Hardy, the classic kind of,
Yeah,
it's probably introvert, extrovert kind of
could be. Yeah,
high status,
yeah,
low
yeah.
status characters on stage.
Fool, bigger fool. Yeah,
Exactly, yeah.
yeah,
So, but that dynamic works well.
yeah.
Obviously, in a more classic sense, Tom and Jerry cartoon
Yeah.
style. They just work. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. You know a bit
Yeah,
more about
that's
this
what
than
I
me.
brought up because they were a very famous pair back in the 50s. But there is tension in pairs. Like I put Martin and Lewis and Abbott and Costello here because both sides fell out. Now, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis went off to their own successful careers, but Abbott and Costello, when Costello, who was the funny one, felt that Abbott, who was the unfunny one, the straight man, was getting too much credit, he wanted them to be called Costello and Abbott
Okay.
and wanted 70% of the money. But when they did split up, he was never successful because there was something about the act that was more than just the guy making funny jokes. So you have to realize that when you're pairing, sometimes as a pair, it's a balancing act. It's like there's this little rapport between the two of you that's more than either individual. Like Elton John and Bernie Taupin.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He does the lyrics, John does the music.
And Bernie is
Yeah,
totally happy with it, even
yeah,
though, and he's very much kind of
yeah,
in the on the sidelines, but very
yeah,
happy, completely happy with
yeah,
that dynamic.
yeah.
Kind of works.
And then we get into stuff like this. So I've been doing a lot of this remote pairing.
Yeah.
So how do you pair remotely? Like remote training pairing is really interesting. Like on this call, we have got a facilitator with us to help us out if we get into trouble. And I've done this a lot with workshops I've done with companies in Ireland where I don't want to be spending my time whilst doing a workshop with you. I want to do content. I want to do agile. I want to do relationships. I want to do rapport. I don't want to do tech support. Okay, your microphone's not working in Zoom. Okay, click the button in the left-hand corner, click it again. I can hear something, but it's faint. I think that may be a different microphone you're connected to. We just don't want to be doing this. And so the two of you can take two different roles here, not different hats, literally different roles.
Yeah.
Like someone looking after the practicalities, someone looking after the content. And in fact, if we look back, chalk and talk, talking and scribing was kind of an example of that,
Yeah.
but just the technology was really primitive, pens and paper. But you could get a similar effect if you need to online. You may need to be more structured if you're doing this stuff online. Put a few more rules between the pairs, so you know how to pair more effectively. We were going to do this online, weren't we? You were
Yeah.
going to be at home, I was going to be at home, but we thought it would just be better to get in person, have a bit more of a bit more fun here, go out for lunch, have a bit more of a good time. And so maybe just need to put a bit more work into that. And then went to the penultimate, really, Paul.
Yeah, so this is about we obviously, Nigel and I have taken a lot of value from pairing. We still do it now, 20 years on. Where we started is pretty much where we still are now. So we're still learning from it, and I think there has to be that humility to that I see pairing even now as a way to improve, even though we're both 20 years into this game, that we can still we're still learning now how to learn from each other and giving feedback to each other and kind of picking up on new ways of working and new ideas, and Nigel's a great sense of knowledge and reads a lot of books, and I don't read as much as Nigel, so I can learn a lot from him, but I'm hoping that equally he can learn something from me. But I think there has to be respect.
So you're setting me up there. So, because but Paul's making a perfect point here, which is you always need to be open-minded. When you're young, when you're starting out, you are naturally open-minded. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. But when you get to a certain level, it's very easy to become very self-confident in your content, right? And I can safely say, every time I do pairing with Paul, with others, I learn something new. Right? Sometimes what I expected to learn, often I had no idea it was going to be turning up. And that's why I think you said about yes and I think it's a really important idea. You're adding, you're building, you're listening, you're being brave by exposing a little bit of your frailties.
And I think also putting myself into this is the reason why Agile and Scrum and all this software development stuff was so interesting to me was because I was working with people, and it can be a very isolating lifestyle if you are a consultant or if you're working on your own predominantly, especially in a remote world. So for me, pairing is the word that's not here is fun. It's a way to re-engage. It's a way to get back to human to human contact, which for some of us is quite a very occasional thing these days.
And that idea of like joy from work,
Yeah.
open-mindedness, learning, creativity. That applies in pairing, whether you're the fanciest trainer on earth, the coolest coach, a new Scrum Master, a developer, a tester. It can be applied anywhere. If men can put baby oil on themselves and roll around in a ring in front of 2,000 people pairing, I'm pretty sure we can apply pairing in most places, can't we? You know what I mean?
Although we're not going to do that here today.
Not much, yeah. And the final surprise is no, we won't be doing that today. So I think that's it, really.
Yeah,
Paul, isn't it, on pairing?
Nice to round it up. It's good.
So if any of you want to get in contact with us, here's Paul's details. Paul at agilify.co.uk. Agilify is his company. You can get him at Paul K. Goddard on LinkedIn. Are you on doing anything on Twitter still with Paul
Not
K.
so much
Goddard?
these days.
I'm not twittering either.
No.
I'm Nigel E. Bake on a variety of other platforms, but I'm not quite sure which ones they are.
LinkedIn tends to be where I am these days.
Same with LinkedIn. And feel free to give us a shout and watch any of our future content or call us up on the network.
Yeah.
They can do the little video gotcha thing, not gotcha. What is it? Where you cameo, where you talk to us and we can talk back to you.
Yeah.
And we're going to be doing other sessions on a variety of other topics, both individually and together, if you're interested.
Great.
But thank you for watching. I've enjoyed it.
Lovely.
You enjoyed it?
Perfect.
Been great fun, mate. Well done.
Good stuff.
Oh, wait, we've got to finish it with a tag team high five.
Right.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.